Hi, I'm Cheryl Cohen, psychologist and mother of four, and I don't believe that they are perfect parents. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Today I'm going to mess up the kids." I prefer the concept of good enough parents. Just like there are no perfect children, there are no perfect parents. I hope to share with you some practical tips on being good enough. And our goal is to raise children effectively. Not perfectly, effectively. So let's get going with episode 2. And the topic for today's discussion is managing anxiety in letting go and letting grow. Now, anxiety is not bad for us. In fact, it gets quite a bad reputation. But actually, anxiety is very much a driving motor in the process of growth and development. Every age and phase has an area of anxiety that motivates a child or a person towards the next phase of development. There's an interesting psychologist who did longitudinal studies and watched children grow over 30 years. And she saw what many children experienced in this large study over a long time. And she found that there is separation anxiety at around 9 months, at 1 and at 3. This is normal and developmental. Why? Because at 9 months, the child, and you'll notice it in your own experience or in your own memory, is before 9 months of age, you can pass a baby from person to person to person in a room. But around 9 months, and obviously give and take a few weeks here and there, it's very hard to pass the baby from a familiar caregiver to an unfamiliar caregiver. The baby will protest. And that's because the baby has developed an attachment to a primary caregiver and now can differentiate through smell, through touch, through familiarity between those that the child knows, those familiar people, and those that the child doesn't know. And we call that an experience of separation anxiety. And it's not a pathology. In fact, it's desirable, not only common, but we want that to be the case because it highlights that actually the child has developed a safe, good, strong attachment to primary caregivers and that they're beginning to differentiate between those that they know and those that they don't know. So it's a healthy, normal developmental experience. At around 1, children do the same. They protest at separating from familiar caregivers like mom and dad or granny and grandpa. And the same happens at around 3, which is quite interesting because those are ages when children are often starting daycare or moving into a school type environment. And I think it's a testimony to the fact that the older children get, the more they realize how little they are. And they're exposed to the losses of growth and development, parts of growth and development, but also the gains of growing and developing. So let's take an example of another stage of development where there is huge amounts of growth, for example, going from sitting to standing to walking. When a baby starts walking, they're so proud of themselves and they are so explorative because now they can get to things that before they could only look at. And so off they go. In fact, I understand why little children are called toddlers because they toddle and they explore, and parents of this age children look like they've been through the washing machine because it's very hard to sit down and finish a hot cup of coffee. But this is normal. This is desirable. It's what we want. However, when babies begin to walk, they give up and lose the opportunity to be carried around a lot. And this can also create some anxiety. So up until then, if you wanted to if you needed to get from the car to your house, and you would pick up your baby, hold them together with all the parcels and walk inside. Now you'll say, when your hands are full of parcels, you'll say, "Come, follow mommy, you need to walk." So there's a loss as much as there's a gain. And those losses do create some upset feelings and some anxiety because the child has to rely on their own internal resources to be able to meet the expectations of the outside world. But these are things that are age and phase appropriate, and that anxiety is not something that we want to avoid. It would be the same, for example, as having a child who's about to get their driver's license. And imagine if you said to this 18 or 20-year-old child, if you said to them, don't worry, it's miles too anxiety provoking for me and for dad and for you to be on the road. We'll take you wherever you want to go, but we're not giving you your driver's license. We're not allowing it, and we're not endorsing it. That would be an arrest in a child's need to grow and develop. Not to say that every person needs their driver's license, but if that's the next step in managing, in growing and developing, and you take that away, it is seen as a loss, and it creates anxiety and arrest in development. So we want children to grow and develop, but of course we want to do it in an age and stage appropriate way. Okay, the next point about anxiety. So the first point was anxiety is not bad for us. It drives development, and there are mixed feelings about moving to the next phase of development, but it's healthy. And as long as we can contain that anxiety and move forward, then we are managing growth and development. We are letting go, we're letting grow, and it's healthy. The next point about anxiety is that it's a protective measure. It's a protection. It's the feeling that creates fight or flight response, and it protects us. And this is built into our human nature. If you're standing in the middle of the road and a car's coming and you get anxious to either fight or flight, it's healthy, because then you get out the road, which is important. So it's the body's way of saying, I'm not safe. However, there are certain experiences like going to school or emigration or moving house where the child is feeling like something is not safe, but actually they are. And this is related to crooked thinking or an inability to manage the explosion of anxiety or the explosion of the central nervous system and all the adrenaline that comes with that. And we have to be able, as we said in the first episode, to contain that. How do you do that when it happens? It's important not to add to the anxiety. Keep calm. Don't rush your child. Rushing for children looks like anxiety, and it puts them on wheels. Don't do that. So keep calm. Don't rush. Give information. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go in the car. We're going to get out, strap up. We're going to get out the car. Mommy's going to walk you to your classroom. There's going to be a hug and a kiss and a wave and a bye. So create a ritual with information that gives your child the opportunity to gain a sense of control over the experience, so that there is predictability, routine, and through repetition comes familiarity. And these are things that help anxiety to be contained or to be minimized, and children then have a sense of gaining control over their experiences, and it's very, very helpful. Anxiety, point number 3, is also contagious. So if you're feeling really anxious, there's nothing like children to identify where your weak spots are. So you might have to also breathe deeply, use mindfulness techniques, but try as much as possible to believe in your children's strengths, support their strengths, support their resilience, their ability to manage, and try your best to keep as calm as possible, because our anxiety is contagious. If we sat together and spoke about the world and politics and all the bad things that are happening and can happen around us, we're all going to be anxious for the rest of the day. So the opposite is true also. We want children to be able to absorb the calm, collected, and containing space that you offer as a parent. Then, of course, number 4 is there are children who have anxious type temperaments. Often, anxiety is genetic. In fact, it has been shown that it is the one thing that does cross the placenta even in utero. And we know that temperament's genetic, and anxiety one can have an anxious type temperament. My observations in working over 33 years with children, parents, and teens is that there's two very popular strategies that people use to manage their anxiety. The one is control and the other is avoidance. I think it's best that we give children a sense of control within well-defined parameters. So they can't control whether they go to school or whether they don't, whether they strap in the car seat or whether they don't. But they can control whether they sit on the left side of the car or the right side of the car, whether they'd like to listen to this type of music or that type of music on the way, whether they'd like to hold mommy's left hand or right hand when walking down to the classroom. So these are things that we give children control over. Another area that we can give them control of is a transitional object, which helps very much with anxiety. A transitional object is like a pacifier, or in South Africa we say a dummy, or a blanket, or a nunu, or a special toy, or even a storybook. It doesn't have to be something that's particularly a special long-term to a child. It can be anything. It can also be, for example, a flower that a child takes from home to school. I find that young children enjoy a job, and if they've got something to do, it's almost like a kind of a distraction, but also a kind of control where they have a sense of, I'm going to take this flower to my teacher and I'm going to hold it and I'm going to give it to her. And that transitional object helps children to make the transition from home to school. So it can also be a very, very useful tool in managing change and moving from one experience or environment to another. Okay, in terms of avoidance, avoidance is something that one has to explore. Is there avoidance because there's something that's bothering a child? So, for example, perhaps the work is too hard. Maybe the child is in a classroom with many, many children who are a lot older than him or her. Is there an intimidating experience? Is there a connection with the teacher? Is there a connection with the children? So you might want to just explore what and why. What's the goal of this child's behavior? And that also can give you some insight. But it is also important that if there's nothing particularly triggering the avoidance, and it's based mostly on crooked thinking, then we need to not feed it. And again, giving a child a sense of control, go back and again and again and again, using the strategies that I've mentioned above. And the last point around anxiety is that sometimes it emerges because of a previous trauma. And there is a sense that this is a reenactment of what happened before. So, for example, if a child got lost on the beach and now you go back to the beach and the child doesn't want to go to the beach and this is your summer holiday, then that could be a reenactment of a trauma that happened before. And I think that our aim, whenever we're dealing with this type of anxiety, is to go for mastery. In other words, look for an experience that the child look for one tiny bit, not experience, one tiny bit of behavior that the child did in the traumatic experience that was very, very clever or very empowering. You were so clever because when you got lost, you stayed in one place so that mommy and daddy could come and find you. Or when you got lost, you screamed at the top of your lungs and made a big noise so people could see that you were in trouble and needed help. Any tiny thing that they manage to do well. And why do we do that? Is because we want to look for opportunities for empowerment. And then in this experience to say, we're at the beach, this happened to you last time, you're not going to get lost. And these are the things that you do if you do get lost. So you give a sense of information, control, and you empower the child by finding something that was very clever that they did last time and that would be very clever if they did this time. Let's summarize the 5 things we've learned about anxiety in managing letting go and letting grow. 1, anxiety is not bad. In fact, age and phase anxiety is appropriate for our children in development. Our aim is not to eliminate it. Our aim is to manage it, to contain it, and to use it as the driving motor towards growth and development. 2, anxiety is a protective measure. It helps us to be able to manage when we're feeling unsafe. And that sometimes is helpful, and we have to be able to also acknowledge that at times. Then, anxiety as contagious. So be careful not to feed your child's anxiety by becoming too anxious yourself. Anxiety could be a part of a child's anxious type temperament. And if that's the case, we want to give our children control within well-defined parameters so that they can learn the strategies of how to manage anxiety rather than be overwhelmed by it. And the last one is anxiety from a traumatic or difficult past experience, and we want to, over there, be able to look for something that our child did in that experience that was very clever that we can apply to the present experience that would be very clever in order to encourage them to empower them and encourage them to gain mastery over the experience too. Thank you for listening. We've come to the end of our discussion of episode 2, and I'd like to say that it's wonderful to share these ideas with you. If you've enjoyed it, please comment and also like. It really does help. I'll be back next week, and until then, please remember there's no such thing as perfect parents.